Welcome to Raaonline. I am Dr. Sudakshina, Professor of Anatomy. Today we will be discussing about the neuroanatomy specimen demonstration and spotters. Coming to the first specimen, which is from the dissection hall, you can see over here this is the specimen of brain with the hindbrain intact and also the brainstem intact. So here we are able to see the inferior surface of the brain, that is not only of the cerebellum, which we are seeing posteriorly, we are seeing the medulla oblongata, this is the pons, and here we are seeing the inferior surface of the cerebrum. Now the posterior part of the inferior surface of the cerebrum is being covered by the inferior surface of the cerebellum because everything is intact. This is the first specimen. We wanted to show you everything is intact. Once we remove this part, that is, we make a section from the midbrain. So here is the medulla oblongata, then the pons, and above this is the midbrain. So we remove this part and remove the cerebellum. We can see the inferior surface of the posterior part of the cerebrum. So if you can see and compare this with this diagram over here, which is showing the inferior surface of the cerebrum only. So this part of the cerebrum is being covered by the cerebellum in the picture, and so the cerebellum is inferior to the cerebrum and it is being separated from the cerebrum by a dural fold which is called the tentorium cerebelli. So tentorium cerebelli is the dural fold which separates the cerebellum, okay, which is lying here, from the cerebrum. And if you see the inferior surface of the cerebrum, you can also see that you have an anterior narrow portion and then a middle portion where you are having the temporal pole, okay, so this is the temporal pole and the temporal lobe, and then you are having the posterior portion which is being covered over here, and that is the occipital pole and the occipital lobe, okay. So this is the inferior surface view. Here in the center, if you see, this is the brainstem, you have the medulla oblongata, the pons and the midbrain. This is the crus cerebri of the midbrain. In the center, we have another specimen also where we are showing you or probing this area so that you can identify this area, and this is the interpeduncular fossa. Okay, and this becomes the optic chiasma. This is here is the optic chiasma, and this is the medial portion. So you have the medial longitudinal fissure which is coming down and dividing it into two cerebral hemispheres. Here one more fissure is actually starting off the cerebrum, and that is the lateral sulcus or the Sylvian fissure. It is actually starting from the anterior perforated substance. Okay, and there are vessels which are surrounding this interpeduncular fossa, and that forms the circle of Wills, which you can see over here. So these are the vessels which form the circle of Wills. So these are the small vessels. You can see here the internal carotid artery is seen over here. This is the same thing as here. Okay, so if you concentrate, this is the optic chiasma which is also seen over here. This is the optic chiasma. So then what else are you able to visualize over here? Definitely the two cerebellar hemispheres which are seen, inferior surface of the cerebellar hemispheres are seen over here, and some structure is being pinned over here which is between the pons. So from the pons, it is connecting the pons and the cerebellum, both the sides. So the cerebellum is very well connected to all the three parts of the brainstem with three cerebellar peduncles. Peduncles are nothing but mass of white matter which are bundled up, and they are like connections between one part of the brain to the other part of the brain. So a connection between the medulla oblongata and the cerebellum is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. The connection between the pons and the cerebellum is the middle cerebellar peduncle. And the connection between the midbrain and the cerebellum is the superior cerebellar peduncle. So the cerebellum is well connected with the brainstem, each and every part of the brainstem, and the name of the peduncle has been given according to the level at which it is connected. So superior cerebellar peduncle, then middle cerebellar peduncle, and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So middle cerebellar peduncle, you can see that it has been pinned. It is a very important spotter for undergraduates. Why? Because it is only going to get afferent fibers to the cerebellum. What do you mean by afferent fibers to the cerebellum is, the cerebellum will be receiving only fibers. The cerebellum won't be giving out any fibers. through this peduncle. Cerebellum will be receiving connections through this middle cerebellar peduncle. And from where it is receiving? From the pons. So these are what fibers are present within the middle cerebellar peduncle? It is the pontocerebellar fiber. These fibers are actually arising from the cortex, cerebral cortex. So they come and they synapse at the pontine nuclei. They cross, and then once they cross, they will come through the middle cerebellar peduncle and it will go to the opposite half. So the fibers which are coming from one half of the cerebral cortex will be going to the opposite half of the cerebellum. They are motor fibers. Okay, so these fibers are also called cortico-pontocerebellar fibers, and they are the only afferent fibers. There are other serotonergic fibers also, but they are also afferent, but this peduncle, that is the middle cerebellar peduncle, won't be transmitting any efferent fibers from the cerebellum to the other parts of the CNS through this middle cerebellar peduncle.